Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America Audio, with your host, Tim Binnall.
Hello out there, my friends. This is Tim Binnall of binnallofamerica.com with another edition of BOA Audio Season 3. It is February 23rd, 2008, and before we dive into the show, let me point out something, an in-house note here. We're having some podcast issues. In short, really, our podcast feed is junk. It's crap. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We've been running it out of a third-party group here for a while, and we're going to be taking it in-house hopefully soon. And all of you folks who use the podcast feed, if you're still using it, I feel bad for you because it stinks. But we should have the new in-house podcast feed set up soon. I'm working on it as we speak. Well, not literally, but I'm working on it. And we'll have that up and running soon, and we'll note it here on the show time and time again. But until then, I suggest you just download the MP3s straight from binnallofamerica.com. That's the easiest way to get the show, because the podcast feed, as I said, it stinks, and we're getting a new one soon. So I want to keep you folks updated on that. Now, let's dive into the program. Our guest this week is a good friend of mine. Actually lives just down the road from me. He is the author of the new book, Dark Woods, Cults, Crime, and the Paranormal in Freetown State Forest, a rising esoteric star. He's got 4 books coming out over the course of 2008. We're talking about the first one here, but towards the end of the interview, we'll hear more about his other books. He is Chris Balzano. Chris Balzano finally here on the program. We had him briefly on for a few minutes on the Monster Mash special, but now we're going to sit down and have a full-length interview all about the Freetown State Forest, which is, I guess to put it in a broader esoteric term, it's a lot like the infamous Skinwalker Ranch. A lot of stuff going on in Freetown and the surrounding area known as the Bridgewater Triangle. We're going to delve into all that good stuff. Bridgewater Triangle, Freetown State Forest, colonial origins, modern-day oddities, zombies, witches, the Pukwudgies. I have a feeling that when Chris really breaks into the super mainstream of esoterica, he's going to be riding a Pukwudgie. This thing is an amazing story. We're going to dig all into the Pukwudgie mystery. We're also going to be doing some true crime stuff. Apparently, Freetown was a haven for cult activity and bizarre murders during the 80s, 90s. And Chris looks at all that in his new book, and of course, we're going to look at all that tonight in this interview. And of course, as we say all the time, tons and tons more. This one goes definitely off the beaten path of esoteric discussion. I know we just did a ghost episode a few weeks back. We're not doing ghosts here. We're doing weird esoteric stuff going on in the Freetown State Forest. Stuff that normally would be marginalized. We're going to be shining the spotlight on it. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Chris Balzano, let me give you a little bit of background on him. Christopher Balzano was a teacher and folklorist living in the Boston area. He has been investigating the unknown for 12 years and running Massachusetts Paranormal Crossroads, a website dedicated to the paranormal and local folklore of Massachusetts, for more than 5 years. His writing has appeared in such respected publications as The Haunted Times, Mystery Magazine, and Unexplained Paranormal Magazine. He's been covered by the Boston Globe, the Boston Herald, the Standard Times, and Worcester Magazine, and has spoken frequently about urban legends and the paranormal at conferences throughout New England. His first book, Dark Woods, Cults, Crime, and the Paranormal in Freetown State Forest, is an examination of the supernatural and the criminal activity in a small Massachusetts town. His second, also out in March, is Ghostly Adventures, Chilling True Stories from America's Haunted Hotspots. He is currently finishing up his third book, An Account of the Ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle. His website is www.masscrossroads.com, masscrossroads.com. Check it out. Without any further ado, let's rock and roll. This interview was recorded on February 2nd, 2008. Chris Balzano, talking about Dark Woods, Cults, Crime, and the Paranormal in the Freetown State Forest on BOA Audio, Season 3. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Binnall of America Audio. It's going to be definitely a fun edition this week because I have a good friend of mine on the program. He is Christopher Balzano, the author of the new book, Dark Woods, Cults, Crime, and Paranormal in the Freetown State Forest. And it's really cool for me to have him on the show. He really sort of is my wingman here in the mass paranormal scene. He kind of introduced me to a lot of these players here in the local scene. He knows all these folks, and he's one of the authorities, I would say, in Massachusetts on the occult history, paranormal history of the area, especially this Freetown State Forest area and the Bridgewater Triangle stuff. I had never really heard much about it until I met up with Chris, and he really opened my eyes to so much that's going on here in the state of Massachusetts. Also, yeah, he only lives about a quarter mile from my house, which is quite a change from some of the other guests we've had on the program. I think the last interview I did was the guy in South Africa. So we go from 7,000 miles away to a quarter of a mile. So we're covering close and far here on the program, so it's exciting to have him on the show. As I said, he's the author of Dark Woods, Cults, Crime, and Paranormal in the Freetown State Forest. It's from Schiffer Books. Christopher Balzano, I'm so happy to have you on the show. Finally, we've been talking about this now for almost a year here. Welcome to Binnall of America Audio. We actually did have him on the show back in October for a little brief face-to-face sort of interview that I did at the Mass Monster Mash, but I've been really looking forward to having him come on the program here for a sit-down interview where we're not felled by the wind and people walking by and stuff. So I'm excited to have him here on the show. Chris Balzano, welcome to Binnall of America Audio.
Tim, thank you very much for having me on. It's exciting to be with you tonight.
Well, let's start out with the bio, the background. Who is Chris Balzano, and how did you gravitate towards this paranormal research?
Well, I've been working in the paranormal field since, I'd say, probably 1994, when I first started kind of chronicling some of the hauntings that were going on in the Boston area, specifically ones that were going on in the old Charles Gate Hotel, which was actually my dorm while I was at Emerson. And I just started noting not only that there were a lot of hauntings and that weird things were happening and people were kind of taking interest, but I was also noticing that as people were experiencing things, they started to kind of transform the actual hauntings and kind of basically rip off old legends and mythology and kind of attach them to the same place.
Yeah.
And I started kind of becoming enthralled by this whole notion that we not only experience paranormal, but because we don't really know what to do with it, we kind of fall back on these classic things that make sense to us or that explain things and apply them. So that was kind of my inspiration for really kind of evaluating some of these classic haunted areas of Massachusetts or ghost stories that I was hearing and kind of look at them not only through a paranormal lens, but also through a folklore lens. And then I just started getting more and more cases. And it's funny what you say in your introduction. I am the authority on the activity in the Freetown State Forest because it's never been out there, but there's just such great lore attached to it and such a great canon of mythology of the weird stuff that's going on there. But I found that it was completely undocumented, and I really found it by chance. So I was glad to kind of hit the nail on the head at just the right time.
Yeah. Let's sort of dive into the Freetown State Forest, if you will, and Freetown in general. Give a little, thumbnail sketch about what is the Freetown State Forest and what is Freetown for people who, we have people who listen from all over the world here, so that, they're unfamiliar with just Massachusetts in general, much less the Freetown State Forest and Freetown itself. So sort of, educate them a little bit about it so we can really dig into some of the lore there in Freetown.
If you have trouble imagining what Freetown is and where it might be, think of the most out-of-the-way place where close to where you are. Some place where within an hour you can go from a big city like Boston or even Providence to absolutely nowhere. A very rural area of southeastern Massachusetts where you go from very metropolis, a lot of bustling activity, a lot of crime actually, and then boom, all of a sudden nothing but trees. And in the middle of this town you have this expansive forest which has been set aside, a lot of it for the Wampanoag Reservation, which is a Native American tribe in this area. And then there's just nothing. So it's a very attractive place for a lot of the darker elements, both supernatural and completely natural in Massachusetts, and they find themselves there very quickly. It's also, because of its proximity to Rhode Island, it's also used by a lot of the criminal activity and things that are happening in Rhode Island as well.
Yeah. And then how big would you say the Freetown State Forest is? Because you and I visited there last April, and we barely sort of scratched the surface of even looking into it for my visit. Just so how big is that area?
The Freetown State Forest is about 15 acres. I'm sorry, it's actually 15 square miles, and the whole town is 25 square miles. So you're really talking a large area, and an area that takes up the majority of the town.
Yeah.
But in terms of civilization, it seems like it's just, you've basically fallen off of the earth when you're there.
Yeah, it's very weird. It's a weird place, just from my experience of visiting there. It's got like a quietness to it that's kind of eerie.
Right, and it's which is funny because a lot of what was going on when I was writing the book was during the summertime, and during the daytime in the summer, it's this completely bustling area, and there's little kids running around, there's families having picnics, and it's done a lot over the past, let's say, 15 years to kind of rejuvenate and kind of change the face that it's had in the public eye for so long. But at night, it's a completely different place. It's a very eerie place. People don't like being there. So the good part of it is that at least during the day, it now has this very positive impact on the community. And a lot of people that go there don't remember a lot of the horrific things that happen there. But those people are still experiencing, at least, if not the darker side of the paranormal, they're at least experiencing a lot of things they don't understand while they're there.
Yeah, and like you were saying that a lot of these people don't know like about the history and how you said that a lot of this stuff wasn't documented. Is that kind of what it's like there now, that they're trying to sort of put that in the past and they don't really want to dredge up that, and the people who are there now kind of aren't in the thick of it like they were back in the 90s or so, when the cult 80s, 90s, when the cult activity was going on, further back when even more strange stuff was up?
Yeah, they tried to kind of completely deny that aspect of it. For them, it's really, hey, come bring your family down. Here's this great place. Here's Profile Rock. It's a national treasure of, not a national treasure, but a treasure of Massachusetts. And come see this beautiful land, untouched. But it really kind of is, kind of basically like putting a silk hat on a pig, because the activity is still going on there, whether it's criminal activity, whether it's low-level cult activity, that's still happening there. People illegally dumping there, people setting their cars on fire because they don't want to pay the high gas prices. All that stuff is still going on there, and yet they advertise it as this newer, better, gentler form of Freetown.
And have you run into, I wouldn't go so far as to say harassment, but maybe you will, but have you run into any any pressure pushing against you from people in the area that are like, listen, dude, don't be bringing this stuff up. Don't go there, either as a warning to you or just as sort of like in their own interest, where they don't want this coming back up again?
Well, when I originally started doing my research, it was much more of kind of internal conflicts. The police didn't want the fire people to get their side of the story and not share theirs. The fire people wanted to make sure the forest people knew what was going on. No one wanted to blame this person, but they kind of were wink, wink, nod, nod.
Yeah.
Now that the book is written, I'm getting a little bit of feedback and kind of a push from the police, only because they are saying, well, you're kind of taking one aspect of a huge part of our history and presenting it. And all I'm really doing is holding, what might not be the best history of the town up to light. So I'm not saying what I've written is the exclusive 100% history of the city of Freetown or the town of Freetown. All I'm saying is, here's this place. It's really weird. Let's look at it and examine it and kind of look at it from the paranormal aspect of it, this negative energy aspect of it. Not, let's record the whole history and get into every great hero who came from Freetown and the parades that happened. All I'm saying is, here's this one element. It's kind of weird. It points at something bigger, which is what really intrigued me about the location. And let's look at that. So they're kind of worried about people going into the forest now and investigating these things. It's a very large area for a very small town police force to cover, but I feel that it's actually probably going to end up being a very positive thing for them, because I think the people that go in are going to kind of bring some spirit back, no pun intended, back to the town.
Yeah, and like you pointed out, there don't seem to be. You pointed out in the book, there don't seem to be people there trying to commercially take advantage of the history. There's no ghost places or haunted restaurants or anything crazy like that.
Right, and that's what actually makes it a very when you investigate the paranormal, everyone wants to grab their camera and go to the haunted restaurant down the street and investigate it and get very excited when they hear these stories about it. But here, Freetown is part of a larger paranormal kind of phenomenon going on called the Bridgewater Triangle, where we have in this area of southeastern Massachusetts such a raised heightened awareness and heightened paranormal activity in this one little area in Massachusetts. And all of the activity that's there, not all the activity, but a large portion of it is not commercial. Can't be explained away. It doesn't have a base root core, something you can hold on to. Doesn't have something you can sell attached to it. So when I hear these stories, it sounds so much more real to me and intrigues me so much more because someone is not benefiting from it.
Yeah.
So if someone's not benefiting from it and they're coming forward and giving their story, then that really means that something is going on and something frightening. Or else why would they, that they have no motivation other than to kind of try to discover the truth.
Exactly, yeah. Obviously, you go there all the time to Freetown and stuff like that. How much time have you spent in the Freetown State Forest? And talk a little bit about your weird experiences in there. Like, I presume you haven't spent the night or anything crazy like that.
I've never spent overnight. When I first heard about Freetown, this was, probably 5-6 years ago. When I first heard about Freetown, that Halloween, I brought a whole group out there. There was maybe 7 of us, and we investigated. And it was pouring rain the week leading up to it. This was actually on Halloween, the week leading up to it. And so the entire town, the entire forest was washed out. So we got kind of as far as we could into the forest, and then realized that we were just walking in mud, and would be walking in mud if we stayed. So that was the only time I've ever been there, kind of at night, when things were shut down. I've been there a lot during the day. And it's just this very, it's kind of like being in any major city in the United States, I would imagine, in the world. There's good neighborhoods and bad neighborhoods. You definitely get a different feel no matter where you go in the forest. The reservation is a very quiet place, a very tranquil place. You get a very positive vibe from it. The Assonet Ledge, as soon as you get there, you feel this heaviness kind of come over you. If you're trying to on the one side of it and you're looking for like where the Carl Drew shack was, which I'm sure we'll talk about, you can tell he was drawn to that place, or they were drawn to that place because it was a very negative feeling. Even though you're not there at the time when he was there, you can feel it, and you can almost feel it like, oh, that neighborhood. So it's very weird. The experiences that I've had there, I'm very insensitive. Is probably not the right word to use, but I don't pick up on psychic things, but I pick up on this kind of stuff. A lot of the stuff that has happened to me in Freetown has been stuff that if it was just kind of one thing, you could push it aside. But on one trip with a gentleman I was going out there with, I got stuck in a ditch, for example, which happens to be you.
Unsavory gentleman. Yeah.
Yes, definitely unsavory. That's kind of one of those things where if it was just that, you could push it aside. One time when I was researching my book, I called my wife to tell her I was on my way home. She hung up the phone. She said, okay, I love you. Hung up the phone, and when she hung up the phone, slipped, fell down the stairs, and put her leg through the window of the door. So she fell down a flight of stairs right after that. Jeff Blanger and I went out there, and I basically destroyed my car looking for the Mad Trucker of Copacut Road, which is a haunted legend in that area. I basically went there another time, and all my legs got completely shredded up, and I had to they needed kind of not dramatic but medical attention. So there's very small little catastrophes that happen that kind of you can push off because they're not that big, and then you start to look and realize every time I go to Freetown, something happens. Something I can't explain in a negative way happens.
Yeah, it's strange. It's a strange place. I don't know if I ever want to go back.
And a lot of times, there's a road that leads to Fall River, and some of the places we've been to together in Fall River doing other radio shows. And Freetown State Forest is kind of on the left as you're going down this one section of that road. And I've experienced time slips twice there as well. So it's kind of like I'll be driving back from that radio show, and it should be about 1:30, 2 o'clock, and I look down, and all of a sudden it's somehow leaped to 3 o'clock.
Oh man!
And I'm kind of baffled, okay, I know I was hanging out, talking, kind of losing track of time, but when I got in this car, it was 1 o'clock, and now it's 3. And I'm nowhere near home.
Yeah.
So once again, is that something solid you could document, take a picture of it, put it in, put under a microscope? Absolutely not. Could it be a person who's really tired driving, a long ways back to his house? Could be. But once again, it's kind of hovering there as unexplained to me.
Yeah. I think that would freak me out more than anything would be the missing time. I don't know. to take a look here at the beginnings, if you will, of where the story sort of picks up here with the Freetown State Forest, and that's the Native American beginnings, really.
Right.
Talk about that whole era, I guess you could say, and the Native American beginnings and their conflicts with the English. And I really found interesting in the book was how the English were sort of like looked down on the Spanish for their way that they did things, but then over time sort of adopted the Spanish way of ultra-violence and then, persecution of the native peoples and all that stuff. It's sort of the activity there sort of caused that turn in a way, and you kind of ponder that rhetorically in the book. But I thought that was really interesting. But let's dive into the Native American beginnings with the Wampanoag tribe and all those great Native Americans and their conflicts with the English settlers.
I think that for a long time we've put Native Americans down. We've repressed. Obviously, land was stolen, wars were fought, pushed west, and now, kind of in our modern era, we've swung the pendulum back the other way, where we have this high respect for culture and religion, and a very critical eye towards our role in the extinction of the Native Americans in this country. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that allows us to romanticize what exactly was here before we got here. Mm-hmm. I think that it's naive to think that, when the first settlers, European settlers, got here, Native Americans were holding hands and singing Kumbaya. They were carrying on civil wars, but not civil wars because there was a unifying kind of source, but tribes were fighting against tribes, nations against nations, people against people. I mean, it wasn't a peaceful country or peaceful land that Europeans found when they got here.
Yeah.
And they were affected by everything that you would expect any kind of civilization to be affected with. And one of the weird things was with these Wampanoags, who were kind of the dominant Native American tribe in New England, right before the Native American settlers got here, a huge section of their population was wiped out by disease. Now, the weird thing is that if you follow the course of the disease, everyone around the Wampanoags were perfectly fine, some tribes even untouched. And yet the Wampanoags, all living in the Bridgewater Triangle, were devastated. So when the Europeans actually got over here, specifically the English, when they first arrived here, they found a very different North America. The Wampanoags were kind of this great power and this great kind of Roman Empire of New England, who were losing their power and kind of holding on to as many straws as they could, cooking as many wampum shells if you will, to kind of regain their power or at least stay on top. And meanwhile, all the tribes around them who had been suffering under the Wampanoags for so long were kind of now taking their shot.
Yeah.
So it really became the key to kind of the Europeans gaining power, because they would basically manipulate all the Native Americans who were going against the Wampanoags, and all these other tribes kind of turning against the Wampanoags. And this was kind of how power was determined, exactly how many allies you had in North America. To the point that, it became one of those situations where unless you were an ally to the English, it was really tough to travel. One town would be English, one town would not be English, or friendly to the English. So if you wanted to go from, what would be Boston to Brockton, you would have to pass 5 different kind of levels and layers. Oh, wow. And so what happened was it led to this very kind of somewhat fake conversion to Christianity. Because the English then began to say, well, we're not going to do business with you unless you believe in God. So throw away your Native American traditions, embrace God, and then we'll allow you to buy and sell. So the Native Americans who would do that became very popular with the British, and the ones that didn't kind of fell by the wayside. Mm-hmm. So obviously the ones in power, the ones with the most to lose, didn't convert, and the other ones did. So what you had was this conflict between the Wampanoags and these Wampanoag splinter groups who would call themselves the Praying Indians, or who the Native Americans called, or the Europeans called the Praying Indians.
Yeah.
And what really started this whole King Philip's War, which is this major war that broke out in 1675, was the fact that the British were basically, and every time they could, they would just bring Native Americans into their courts and kind of charge them with all these crimes. And finally, it was the death of a Wampanoag at the hands of a Wampanoag, and they were brought into an English court, and they were executed for that. And King Philip, who was kind of the son of the great sachem Massasoit, decided, because basically based on a lunar eclipse, another paranormal event, that they had to go to war. And so what happened was basically a year of the most bloodiest fighting that this continent has ever seen. This put kind of, maybe per capita there were more, or in terms of numbers, there were more people killed in the Civil War. But this was almost barbarism. I mean, there was absolute horrible war atrocities committed on both sides. So what you had were these Europeans who, like you said, when they came, kind of prided themselves on, well, we're not the conquistadors. We're going to come and we're going to make friends with Native Americans. We're going to convert them to Christianity. We're going to create, the perfect society here. And basically what they would then do is beat their heads in with rocks.
Oh, wow.
And then you would have the Wampanoags who would go into an English village and burn the entire thing down, killing women and children. And then what you had was the Europeans going into Wampanoags and basically killing women and children and old people and gathering them up and shooting them, and even though they were defenseless. So this war over this little, basically useless piece of land, who no one really wanted up till the point that it became important enough to fight over, and they were just completely leaving their humanity aside. It was disproportionate to what war should have been. And these two basically civilized societies, casting aside everything that was good about their personalities and good about what they were as civilizations, and kind of just, going at each other in the most horrible ways.
Yeah, and you kind of raised the issue there that it is so disproportionate that it's too quick to sort of say, oh, well, all the weird stuff's going on because of the Native American history, because of some kind of Native American curse, when really maybe just the area might have something to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, as a paranormal investigator, and there's a ton of different paranormal investigating groups in this area, looking into that, you want to find the source, and you want to find the golden key that's going to make it all make sense. And sometimes there isn't a golden key. Sometimes it's just you've unlocked another door and you've opened yourself up to something completely different. So a lot of people stop at King Philip's War as being like, oh, well, there you go. It has to be this absolutely horrible, these crimes that happen, this violent war. That's what made all this negative energy come in. And I'm kind of one of the first people who said, oh, wait, what made them be so violent in the first place? Is it the chicken or the egg? Which came first, the monstrosity or the thing that made it? And so I've really hopefully kind of forced people to kind of reevaluate the way that they consider King Philip's War in the context of the paranormal.
Yeah. And then jumping ahead in the book here to one of the stories that I found most interesting, it's in a bizarre sort of way, just because I don't hear too many stories like this, and that's just the zombies section of the book. Zombies in Freetown State Forest. I'm tweaked out by that in general, like I said, because I've never really heard about it. Talk a little bit about these zombie reports and the stories you have here in the book about zombies in the Freetown State Forest. These are relatively recent, not stuff from back then.
Oh no, this is stuff that has happened in the past. I think the latest report I have is about maybe 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And the most recent report being 2000 or so. And this is kind of like if you're a paranormal investigator, imagine this is the miscellaneous folder. Yeah. Is it a ghost? Well, it doesn't really seem like it's a ghost because it's really, really solid. Is it some kind of monster? Well, it doesn't feel like it's a monster because it's a human. It doesn't have any really kind of monster qualities to it. Is it just a crime that you happen to come across? That seems like it might be one of the most, or at least the most sane explanation, but it doesn't really fulfill everything that's going on. What people are finding in the forest is that there are these people walking around who kind of have a blank expression, move very kind of much in this kind of daunted kind of way, like they're being weighed down by something. Most importantly, they look like they've been just dug up out of the earth.
Yeah.
Now, there is a lot to be said for the demographic of the area. You're talking about a lot of Portuguese, Cape Verdean people, a lot of Haitians who, for them, voodoo and practicing kind of this witchcraft attached to voodoo practitioners and Santeria and Palamao, all are kind of living in that area and have the potential to create these zombies out of these people. And I'm not necessarily talking about, the classic walking around looking for human brains to eat and mindless creatures. I'm talking more about people who have fallen victim to some kind of practitioner of one of the witchcrafts, who's been told that they're dead. Society has told them that when this happens to you, you lose your soul, and they're somehow being used for negative gain in the forest. So people have been actually attacked by these people who look like they've been dug up and move in this very deliberate way, who don't seem to stop. They've even gone so far as to reach into people's cars and try to grab them and pull them out.
Wow. Aside from the people who've told you the zombie stories, have you had any sort of other corroborating sort of thing where, like you point out the Portuguese and the voodoo aspects of it, has there been any sort of connector involved there where, someone might have said, even if it's like off the record, you don't have to tell me who it is or anything, but just someone, where you can connect A to B, if you will? Or is that just sort of a theory?
Well, I really feel strongly that I've talked to Satanists who practice in the forest. I've talked to Wiccans who practice a very negative form, a very positive form of witchcraft in the forest. And I've talked to basically every kind of variant in between. And they all say that the Freetown State Forest has this energy unlike any other place that they've ever been. That when they conduct their rituals or their ceremonies or their prayers there, they feel it stronger than anywhere else they've felt it. So is that evidence that another group, such as someone who believes in Santeria, would go there to tap into that same kind of powerful energy? It's not definitive proof, but at least gives me kind of this other level of it making sense that it would be that voodoo practitioners that created these zombies.
Yeah. And the other sort of creature I want to talk about from the Freetown State Forest. Now, I'm sort of jumping around here in the book, and there's tons of great stories and ghost stories and strange stories in there, but I'm jumping on to the ones that I had never heard of, and I think the audience hasn't heard of yet. Obviously, they haven't heard of some of these unique ghost stories, but they've heard ghost stories before. But I don't think they've ever heard of these things called the Pukwudgies. And one of the things you're kind of pretty well known for, you're kind of like the Pukwudgie man.
Right, the Pukwudgie guy.
Oh, yeah, you're sort of the Pukwudgie man. So I guess tell people what the Pukwudgie is and fill us in on the Pukwudgies.
Sure. First, let me say that it's really interesting that you should use those phrases to kind of describe us just kind of exploring and delving into this book, because trying to sort through what's going on in Freetown is a lot like jumping around. I really had to kind of have this whole table full of index cards with all these different stories that I was getting and be like, okay, what would I classify this as? It would fall here. So it really was not until you get kind of this kind of look above the whole thing, you have the whole story that you kind of put these pieces together. And one of the kind of interesting underlining things with a lot of this activity that's going on are these Pukwudgies. And these Pukwudgies are kind of classic, if we were Europeans, we would call them maybe trolls. They're 2 to 3 foot tall, human-like creatures. Like they have very human-like features, arms, legs, bellies. I say bellies because a lot of them describe it as the belly kind of falling over the waistline. The two things that are really odd is they have a really long nose, which some people have described as being canine-like. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of hair. So it almost looks like a combination between what we would traditionally call a troll, if we're thinking small troll, not big troll, and a werewolf. And so this is a weird kind of combination of the two. And these are creatures that go back thousands of years in Wampanoag folklore. They talk about it, and they talk about it as kind of whenever anything would go wrong, it would be, you know what, the Pukwudgies are playing with us again. And so if you really trace the history of the Wampanoag people, especially through those disease times and the arrival of the settlers from Europe, you can really find that they changed their role to Wampanoag society. Originally, they were very mischievous and would play jokes and, be very, the Pukwudgies are at it again. Then at some point, the Wampanoag creator god, Mashop, basically goes under the water, has this very torrid love affair with this siren of the sea, and leaves them alone to kind of their own free will of the place, and they end up becoming evil. And so evil words start being used. Instead of mischievous, it becomes heinous. Instead of playful, it becomes evil or deadly. And they end up going into Wampanoag villages and kidnapping little kids and setting the villages on fire. And then they're known for basically drawing Native Americans into the forest using these things that they call tai-pai-wunkas, which is very interesting to, when you are researching things, when things just line up. If you're a good researcher, you love what you do, those are the kind of moments you die for. And so I'm reading these books, and they're talking about these Taipaiwunkas, and then all of a sudden they say to them, they make this reference to Wisp of the Wills, which anyone who's investigated paranormal activity knows that's a very early European term for orbs. Mm-hmm. So what they're basically saying in these books, if you follow the path, is they were using these orbs, which they believed were the spirits of the dead, to draw the Native Americans into the forest where they would then kill them. Huh. Oftentimes throwing them off of a cliff or drowning them in water. And so this is kind of like what they were blamed on. So when people started showing up missing or dead, mainly probably by disease, people would say the Wampanoags took them and killed them.
You mean the Pukwudgies?
Yes, I'm sorry, yes, the Pukwudgies. So what actually ends up happening is after the Europeans get here, all of a sudden they start, these Pukwudgies start to become the tools of the devil with a capital D. So Christianity is kind of showing its rearing its head in the folklore, and then all of a sudden it becomes, well, the devil sends these Pukwudgies out to do his bidding. But these are things that are still happening today. People are still seeing this Pukwudgie all over New England. I've got cases. I've got a case in Virginia. I've got a case in California. People are seeing these little troll-type things. And what happens was, how do you tell the difference between something and a Pukwudgie? Is the reports kind of draw me in because they describe them as very hairy and kind of evil-looking, and a negative thing happens. But then they also were describing these kind of flashes of light, these orbs as they describe them, or sometimes they just say rods, these basically explosions of light that are kind of very ominous to them. And they're then reporting these very dark figures that are also around the same area. So when I've got three different elements that are consistent, I say, well, sounds a lot like a Pukwudgie.
Yeah. And so you're getting these, I was going to ask you if this is something that's not just a Massachusetts phenomenon or if they're found in other places. And have you looked not just at the reports that you've gotten from other places in the country, but sort of like in a historical perspective? Are they something that might have been shown up in other Native American cultures, like how we have the Bigfoot showing up in various Native American cultures?
Completely. They've been showing up in not only Native American culture, but in old European culture. There's the same references to things that are very similar to that. So I've not only recorded, or not recorded, but now I've heard of and kind of documented cases that are very active today, but also in the lore. And they're called just different things throughout all the kinds of different levels of Native Americans here and then old cultures in Europe. And that's how people approach it with me. Hey, I run your website about Pukwudgies. They kind of sound like, and they'll throw out their own regional variant of it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when things get really interesting for me, is when I start seeing the same thing happening over and over and over again in different parts of the country and then different parts of the world. I mean, there's a very similar thing to Pukwudgies happening in South Africa, for example. And it's the same kind of thing going on. So if it's happening one place and the Wampanoags are attributing it to this, and it's happening another place, then you really have to start looking at maybe this is a paranormal creature or a monster that might be much more something that's under our bed than something that's in a book.
Yeah, it sounds pretty interesting. I've never really, like I said, I never really heard of Pukwudgies per se, trolls and that kind of thing, obviously, yeah. But this is really unique and different. And you get, like, contemporary reports of these sort of sightings, too. This isn't just, like you said, it's not just in the lore. Have you talked to people that in the area that have actually seen these things of recent times?
Oh, yeah, very much so. I've got one person who said he made contact with someone who wrestled one. And we keep talking about wanting to find out more about that case. But it seems like every time that I am someplace and I'm talking about it, someone has another story to tell me about them. And that's what makes it exciting, because you realize that these stories are all out there. People just don't have a forum to communicate them.
Yeah.
And so it's really kind of it's taken on this life of its own. So I don't mind being the Pukwudgie guy so much anymore, because people are feeling the need to tell me exactly what's going on with their Pukwudgie world. So
as a strange also element to the Pukwudgies that I noticed too, from when you and I went down for Spooky South Coast, they were kind of talking about it. And in the book here, you said that you were lecturing in Freetown for the Freetown Historical Society, and like half the people had heard of them. There's a unique kind of, for lack of a better term, popularity of the Pukwudgies. It seems like, despite the evil connotations and characterizations of the creature, there's sort of a weird, people kind of like them in a weird way.
It's very funny because they sound like a kind, gentle kind of, oh, look, it's the Puckwudgies. I've got, there are people who want to start making Puckwudgie shirts. And it's really like, you know what, that's great. It's a great story. If you want, I'll sit you or your children down and read you this children's book that was written years ago about the Puckwudgies. But if you talk to the people who have experienced them, they're anything but nice. They wish they could take back their Puckwudgie experiences. They don't want that feeling of waking up in the middle of the night to have the Puckwudgie looking in the window at them, basically saying to them, I know where you are, just so you know. So there is this very kind of like we've made a hero out of Freddy Krueger and Charles Manson and these very like things because they become pop culture, but to actually come face to face with one and feel the fear that these people had is a much very different thing going on with them.
Yeah, and to jump back into the forest, let's talk about the Witch of the Woods, because that story was really creepy and definitely one that kind of spooked me out a little bit, especially the cat part.
Yeah. Again, look, one thing, where do you classify this? Like Puckwudgies, are they ghosts? Are they monsters? I mean, what exactly? They touch upon so much that where do you put them? Where do you put them if you've got that flashcard? On what end of the table? The Witch of the Woods is another great example of that, where basically there was this group of boys from a young age up through their teenage years who were all having these kind of nocturnal attacks by this woman who they all described as being a witch. She was kind of evil looking with this disheveled, long gray hair, and she would come to them in their dreams. And I was told the story by this one gentleman who's now in his 20s, who came to me with the story and kind of wanted to know what was going on, if I had heard anything ever like this. And he basically told me that this woman used to come to his window and asked to be let in. I always think of, when I tell the story, of Salem's Lot with the vampire scratching on the window saying, let me in. Mm-hmm. And he would never let her in. And he always thought he was dreaming. And it's got this kind of old hag feel to it.
Yeah.
Except for the fact everything in the Bridgewater Triangle and Freetown has this kind of twist to it, right?
Yeah.
Except for the fact he gets up and goes to the window. Kind of the old hag is she's on you, and she's kind of sucking your energy and making it so that you can't move. So whether her physical description is very much like an old hag, instead he gets up and goes to the window and has a conversation with her. And these attacks were almost all at night. And he would sometimes have dreams of her where he would go to this house in the woods near him. And he actually would go there. He would find her engaged in kind of a sexual way with a Native American, and then he would kill the Native American. And this kind of dream happened several times to him, until one day him and his friends were out there in the woods, and they found the house. They found the foundation of this house that he had never seen before, but only dreamt of. And he said, this is really weird. I have this dream. There's this woman who attacks me, blah, 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 blah. And he ended up finding out that his friends were having the same exact dreams and were describing the same exact woman. One of them actually was sexually assaulted by her because he let the woman in at night. And then the parents came in and they found him like basically as if he was being held down and forced to do things he didn't want to. And they were completely baffled as to why this would happen to him. So this area became very kind of known throughout the neighborhood, and people all throughout their teenage years, this one group of kids kept experiencing this woman, and as they got older, it kind of got more intense. But there were other paranormal things kind of playing around there. One of them was this very kind of almost like a mirage type of ghost that they would often see in the woods. And the other one was this very weird cat who would walk on two legs, walk on hind legs. And they saw this several times, always attached to something a time when there was other kind of paranormal activity. And they would see this cat basically walking around like a human, almost as if it was some kind of a witch familiar or someone who was kind of being used by the witch in a classic kind of Salem, the witch and her black cat. And sometimes the witch is the black cat.
Yeah.
So this thing would run around on its hind feet and kind of pursue them sometimes even. And so it becomes this very kind of weird story of this witch who had attacked them at night, and these weird things they were seeing in the woods, and these kind of like, like the predator in the woods, kind of seen but not seen. You would see this very weird shape kind of moving, and then this cat who would randomly show up. No one in the neighborhood owned a cat. No one had ever seen the cat unattached to something weird or paranormal. And all this stuff was kind of playing itself out just right across the street from the forest. Basically, the only thing separating the forest from this neighborhood was Profile Rock, which is another great haunted location in the forest, and then a large cranberry bog.
Yeah, that's one of the stranger stories, and I give hats off to you in the book, because it could have been, you could have just done a book on just ghost stories of the area. And I'm sure you have a book in you of just ghost stories of the area, but this book really hits on a lot of other weird stuff. Do you know what I mean? There's the Pukwudgies, the zombies, the witch in the woods. I mean, there's a lot going on there that isn't the 5 basic food groups of paranormal activity.
Right. I think a lot of people stop at that level of, well, there was a fight and guy A shot guy B, and that's why there's a ghost. But you can't, partly because I think that's kind of just boring and done before, and partly because you don't have that in that area of Massachusetts. I wanted to dig deeper and say, wait a minute, how come these same towns are experiencing a lot of ghosts, but then experiencing high levels of teen suicide and mental health disorder and depression and crime? Is it possible that they're connected? I mean, if this was any other thing and we weren't talking about ghosts and we weren't talking about Pukwudgies and cats walking on their hind legs, people would say, they would slam their fist down and say, well, let's do a study and let's fund it and see what's going on. But because it touches into the realm of the paranormal, people don't want to talk about it. And it's one of those things where you can go town by town by town in the Bridgewater Triangle area and see this kind of thing happening. And what I found out is that Freetown is not only probably, a good example of this, but it's also kind of a symbol of everything that's either right or wrong, depending on how you look at it, about the Bridgewater Triangle and southeastern Massachusetts. And a great place for us to begin exploring the connection between all of these kinds of things. Where we're in kind of the paranormal and the supernatural goes in cycles, and you talk about this very well, about, right now ghosts are very popular. And we're coming off, like you talk about, coming off the swing of like 9/11 conspiracy theories being very popular. Mm-hmm. And that our eyes are averted to certain things over periods of time. And so often it's I study ghosts, and so I think that cryptozoologists are idiots. And don't even get me started on those ufologists.
Yeah.
And so there's this kind of splintering of all these different groups. And anyone who's kind of someone who studies everything, people say, well, you're just kind of, an ADD supernatural investigator. We haven't never really sat down at a conference or just kind of sat at the table all together with law enforcement, with mental health people, and said, hey, let's all look at this together. So hopefully, I know a book can't do that kind of thing, but I hope to at least kind of sit down as an expert in some of those things, or at least, someone who's experienced in a lot of those different aspects of the world, kind of sat down and said, let me take one town in Massachusetts and see if I can do it with that.
Yeah. What's an ADD paranormal investigator? I never heard of that.
I invented it 2 seconds ago. No, what I'm saying is if you take someone who's, for example, in the early days of the internet, it was okay to have, here's my website, it's dedicated to ghosts and UFOs.
Yeah.
And nowadays, that's unheard of. You can't do that. You can't. No, especially after kind of the TAPS revolution, ghosts are ghosts and UFOs are UFOs, and never the two should meet. If you're a paranormal investigating group, you lose your credibility if you start talking about aliens. And if you're a ufologist and you start talking about the potential for there to be, ghosts kind of, on a dark and stormy night, you lose your credibility. So I guess what I meant by an ADD supernatural investigator is it's a derogatory term for people who, in other people's eyes, get into too much, put their fingers in too many pies.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a doctor who says, well, I'm an oncologist, so I don't study the brain. So if there's something going wrong with the brain, I'm just going to consider that outside of my realm and not get into it. And it's like, one part of your body kind of has everything to do with it. It's kind of, we need to appreciate that specialization and become specialized if we feel the need to, but really kind of become an expert in everything that's going to kind of, explain something. Especially paranormal investigators are very much into, this being a science now, and this being something that You have to go through certain techniques and certain standards for anything that you gather to be considered relevant. And so therefore you kind of have to leave these things aside. Well, scientifically, you should really try to, however silly it sounds, the first thing you should say is, well, could this be a UFO? Well, could this be, a Bigfoot or a puckwudgie or some other kind of cryptid? Well, okay, now that I've get those things out of the way, and I've explained away it, in terms of like a natural thing, now we can start looking at the paranormal aspect of it.
Yeah. You raise a rhetorical question. Let me jump back to the puckwudgies. What do you think? Cryptid or something, beyond paranormal? I guess you could say they are cryptid because they're an unclassified creature.
Right,
but
right.
Would you say, like a flesh and bones type of maybe a lost race or an animal of some kind that's, smart like a Bigfoot? Or do you think it's something that's like supernatural in a way, interdimensional or magical, if you will, for lack of a better term?
You're supposed to kind of stay away from this kind of stuff in a way, but not for me. I think it definitely has something to do with something more closely related to a demon. I think that they're very much like during, demonology will tell you about this hierarchy that exists kind of in the demonic realm, and these different things that, one attacks and the others kind of swoop in like vultures and kind of snack on what's left behind. That sounds like a puckwudgie to me. That there's this hierarchy of these orb lights, and then the puckwudgies, and then these kind of shadow dark men who are there. So to me, it seems like, and I hate to get into the religious aspect of this whole thing, but once again, it exists there. I think they feel a lot more like demons, to be honest.
That's what we're looking for, honesty, man.
and this is actually the first time that I've ever kind of said that before and kind of, looked at, well, what exactly is it, rather than just allowing it to exist. But to me, it really feels like something much darker and much more evil, and something that was very much enticing in that early lore.
Yeah.
And considered harmless until it was allowed to roam free and kind of go wild, and then it went wild.
Yeah. And then just from one of the stories in the book on the puckwudgies about how, and you kind of referenced it here, about how the puckwudgie saw the guy and then somehow was at his house or something like later. Unless you have to have access to some kind of, higher intelligence, I guess you could say, to know where someone lives if you saw them like that. You know what I mean? If it was just an animal, I guess it could follow the scent. Maybe I'm underestimating the ability of animals, but I don't think so. I think there would have to be some kind of higher intelligence there where it would know that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, not to mention the fact that, in the early lore of these puckwudgies, they're described as almost being like air. I mean, they're described as being fireflies, being able to turn themselves into bugs and light and disappear. They're described as being able to turn themselves into the wind. Things that kind of defy your classic cryptid description, something very solid, maybe something like you were saying, more interdimensional, but something that definitely is not your standard, if we can have a standard, which is kind of weird to say, but not your standard kind of unexplained animal, but much more something kind of that's tapped into some kind of higher intelligence.
Yeah. Well, that's the big debate in Bigfoot studies. It's been the big debate for generations now, flesh and bones versus supernatural. So it's only natural, no pun intended, to extend that, I guess you could say, to the puckwudgie debate. With your work and as you get more sightings and reports and stuff like that, I have a feeling that this won't be the last we hear of the puckwudgies. I have a feeling this might be one of those stories that's going to break through, that's going to get bigger as time goes by, now that it has a name. Do you know what I mean?
Right. And that at least has kind of a little bit of momentum behind it, because there are no, as far as I've kind of experienced, there is no shortage of people who have experienced something that kind of touches upon this puckwudgie experience. And so it seems like we're really kind of just the beginning of maybe an upswing of people, now that it's being talked about, reporting their own cases. And then we can really start to evaluate and separate. Because I'm actually already even seeing kind of two variants of the puckwudgie itself, physically. There's kind of a dark one, which is less hairy, and then a one that's almost red-like, and has much thicker hair, unnatural hair, as opposed to just very hairy, like a hairy human. One that's actually almost like more like a furball kind of one.
Weird. And with the risk of at the risk of misquoting him, has Lauren Coleman said anything about the Pugwudgies? That seems to be almost in his wheelhouse.
I believe he's mentioned them. I know that the first person to use the expression in terms of activity in the area, I believe would have been Joe Citro. But whenever you quote anything like that and you don't say that Coleman said it first, he always can turn around and say, well, actually, I said it, 15 years ago in this thing. And so I'm probably going to say, Lauren Coleman's kind of the center of everything, especially seeing that he coined a lot of the words we use in this area to investigate. And was the first person on the cases of a lot of these classic cases that are in the area. So I want to say that he might have, but I really I latched onto it because of Joe Citro.
All right. Well, when I get Lauren back on the show, I'll make sure I ask him.
He's definitely heard of them. And I believe he actually said, "Oh yeah, you had this case here." And actually, when we were at the Monster Mash together a few months ago, one of the people who's was with Coleman but not with him, but kind of from the same town in Maine, said, "Oh yeah, here's a Pukwudgie story from 20 years ago." Yeah. So I know, and I think he had said that he had spoken to Lauren about it. So it's definitely one of those things that's known.
Okay.
I don't need to live in this physical realm. I walk around in the physical realm, and I put on the faces, and I talk, and I play, and it's this big act, man.
You're listening to Binnall of America Audio.
In the spiritual world is where I live. I exist in places you never even dreamed of.
And then to sort of move into the other part of the book, this is another cool aspect of the book. It's like a dual book in a way. It's paranormal, and then it's also sort of a true crime book, because there's a lot of crime that went on here in the Freetown State Forest that is abnormal crime. It's not your run-of-the-mill crime you expect to know about or hear about. And I guess we'll sort of jump in at what may be the onus for a lot of this crime activity. And this sort of cult aspect that's going on in the Freetown State Forest, or was going on in the Freetown State Forest in the 80s, and maybe before then, maybe after then, I don't know, I'm going to ask you. Start first with talking about the cult activity in the Freetown State Forest, because that's a big part of the book and a big part of the forest.
Right. I would say that it's almost impossible to say that the cults are gone. Specifically, the negative cults or the satanic cults have entirely left the forest. I don't think that that's true. I think you still have very low-level, non-criminal elements that worship Satan and are in the forest. And first off, I should say that there's nothing inherently illegal or criminal about worshiping Satan. And that it's a First Amendment right, and more power to you if that's what you believe. I'm glad people at least believe something sometimes.
Yeah, hey, that's cool. We have no problem with that. Go ahead.
But there was a lot of bad things that happened in the forest in the name of Satan. And that's the kind of stuff that I really try to focus on in the book. And so there are these cults, and the cults go back, probably predate, and I hate to even mention the name because now it seems like I'm attaching it to, but predates the Church of Satan and Anton LaVey's and his activities. Mm-hmm. It's kind of always been there. Alan Alves, who was one of the investigators in Freetown, one of the detectives in Freetown, said he was documenting this stuff in the early 70s when he first started on the forest, and he would see them as already an established religion within the forest. So telling they were newcomers there. Everyone on the forest knew about them, that they were in the forest doing this stuff. So at least the low-level people have been there, for the past 30 years, if not longer. The more organized cults seem to have moved in somewhere in the mid-70s, and they're long gone now, specifically probably after 1988, and which I've now dubbed the Year of Satan, because I've just started documenting all of this criminal satanic activity that happened in the year 1988. It's one of those things where if you see the cult, then you're not really seeing the cult. A lot of the activity kind of came to a head in the late 80s, and then they're kind of into the early 90s. But it's been there for such a long time that no one can really tell when it started.
Yeah. Extrapolate a little bit on what you said just now, where if you can see the cult, you're not actually seeing the cult. Talk a little bit about what you mean by that.
Sure. If you believe, and I guess you should talk a little bit about Alan Alves, who should have been just a small-town police officer. He shouldn't have had much to do with his day. He should have gone home and kissed his wife at 5 o'clock when his shift was over. And here was a man who not only investigated almost 20 homicides in his time on the force, which is unheard of for a town this small. But he also, because of the nature of many of these crimes, had to become an expert on occult crimes. So in other words, this guy was going out there. It's a small little rural town, really kind of Opie kind of thing going on, and he is becoming an expert on witchcraft and the paranormal and satanic activity across the United States and demonology and all these things that had nothing to do with law enforcement and everything to do with this weird tide of occult happenings that were happening in the United States. And this guy was becoming an expert on it. So if you listen to what he says, and I listen to what he says, I put a lot of weight into what he says, that there are different levels of cult activity. And one of these cults is highly organized and basically in control of a lot of the crime and a lot of the drug running and prostitution in that area of Massachusetts. And it's both kind of this satanic cults are a way of not only unifying the people that are in charge, but also of constantly getting a flow of people and materials to kind of use in that area.
Yeah.
And Alan Alves actually even talks about an even higher cult, which is much more kind of, based on this kind of Illuminati, 5 rulers of the world kind of thing, which he actually believes the cult goes up that high. But we're at least able to kind of tap into this, at least this one that is basically in control of southeastern Massachusetts. And it's very interesting because when you peel off a layer, something else comes up. So one of the classic cases that's in that area that I link to the paranormal and I link to cult activity, even though he doesn't, is the case of James Cater, who was basically abducted this one woman. Was put in jail for it, and then as soon as he got out, he abducted this other young girl and killed her. Well, as I was talking to Alan last time I saw him, and actually you were with me at the radio taping, he turns to me and he says, "Oh yeah, you know that he was connected to the mafia, that he was connected to organized crime." And boom, snap my finger again. There's another connection that perhaps all of this stuff is also, tied into organized crime in kind of a traditional classic sense too.
Yeah. When we were talking that weekend, you kind of raised the issue that I think someone had mentioned it to you, that the possibility that the cult activity may be used as a cover for drug running and that sort of thing to divert the police from one
Right.
thing to the other, and you kind of. I see parallels between this and the Hells Angels, how they started out as sort of like a little motorcycle club and it turned into like quite a massive enterprise of drug running and other criminal activity. Perhaps it's a situation like that.
Right. I think that the one thing that can't be ignored is the fact that groups tap into a negative energy there. So I don't think it's entirely just this face that people put on. Mm-hmm. I think it's more of a cult finds its way to the force and then finds a way to finance itself. So I think that there are very scary, very human elements to the satanic cults that are there, and I think that they're in charge of a lot of the drugs, a lot of the prostitution, child pornography, running through the New Bedford Fall River area, which had its home. These people who were doing this thing had their home in the Freetown State Forest. So in other words, they were cult members who then got into crime, as opposed to vice versa.
Yeah.
But one of the interesting things was I was talking to a police detective, and he said, "Oh yeah, I worked on that case." He was actually, I think, referring to the highway killings, and he said, "I was the first person on the scene for one of those." No, he was the Carl Drew. I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah," and I was put on the task force to investigate that. And I was like, "Well, what happened?" And "Oh, well, we didn't find anything." He said, "But I really, we were really kind of working on this other stuff, and I was part of the drug task force that Alan Alves had formed, and I got taken off of that and put on this." He's like, "Oh, yeah, all the time we were taken off of these things and put on these serial killer cases and these weird cult cases." And I started to think, hey, wait a minute. If I was going to run a drug enterprise, or if I was going to run a prostitution enterprise, and I'm not talking the local pimp down the street, I'm talking, millions of dollars running in and out of that area of the world,
yeah,
an area of the state, that seems like a great way to keep the cops occupied. Create a phantom for them to follow. Create a ghost for them to try to investigate so that you can kind of sneak under and do your dirty deeds under the cover of night. And I think there's an element to that in Freetown, but I think that it's also a crime of opportunity in terms of all that stuff was going to happen anyway. They were just using it.
Yeah. And when you talk about, like, cult activity, for someone like me who's, pretty docile creature, what exactly would you describe as, like, cult activity? I'm trying to, like, I would like to be maybe a random witness to this, but in a safe way. Like, if I'd like to see a video of it, I wouldn't want to be there.
Right.
What would you describe as, like, the cult activity going on in the Freetown State Forest? Rituals and sacrifices and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think in its most gentle form, you have people who go out there, usually in a group, a small group, set a few fires, chant a little bit, hold hands, live off the energy, and maybe engage in some, kind of sexual activity or something, maybe drugs, something that harms no one but the people that are involved in the ceremony.
Yeah, sounds like a good time.
Right. Sounds like actually what I'm planning on for tomorrow night. Minus the forest, but and there might be, there's an element of vampirism to it too, where sometimes they cut themselves and drink each other's blood. Something that is creepy and yet not really illegal and there's really no long-lasting negative effects to it psychologically to them. Then it kind of goes up to the next level. The next level would be the sacrificing of small animals, chickens, rabbits, and these carcasses are found all throughout the forest, killed in unnatural ways. So obviously, if you're in a forest, you're going to find dead animals. But not dead animals pinned to trees like they were crucified, which is what they found. Or birds sacrificed in the middle of pentagrams. This is all documented stuff. I've got pictures upon picture of these kind of scenes that Alan or other police detectives came upon. Then you go to kind of the next level and you start seeing cattle found in the forest. Dead, mutilated, completely drained of their blood without a drop of it on the floor, without a drop of it in the forest. So in other words, people who are experts at extracting that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now you're dealing with people that are a lot more serious about what they're doing.
And to jump in, that kind of raises another issue that I had read in the book, and I wanted to ask you, because when we talk about the cattle mutilation phenomenon, a lot of times it's like, well, local authorities blamed it on cults and stuff like that, and I always kind of poo-pooed that. But then after I read your book, it was kind of like, well, maybe there is something to that. I find it intriguing that they would have a way of removing all the blood like that, and that maybe there is more to cattle mutilations being the product of cults than the product of, nefarious government plans or aliens or something like that.
I mean, I think that the way Alan describes it, the way Alan Alves goes through the whole process of how you could extract the blood from a cow without ever spilling a drop of it and collect it and carry it away with you, you have to believe that it's at least possible that cults are doing it, because it makes complete sense. You basically tap into the jugular, and with every beat of that cow's heart, it's basically, filling up your jug.
Yeah.
And you can do it without, if you're good enough at it, you can do it without spilling a drop of it. Also, you can also consider the fact that it's done somewhere else and then the animal's dumped.
Yeah.
Where these animals are found, it's not someone who's, driving a Pinto,
yeah.
You know what I'm saying, carrying this. I mean, so even that in of itself has some kind of level of organization to it. It's unexplained, and yet if you kind of take it with the other elements of things that are going on, in other words, if you find that and then you find, an underground bunker where you find all this weird satanic material very close to where those cattle are found, well, now you're starting to look away from the government and away from aliens and putting more weight into the cult part of it.
Yeah, totally. Like the cattle mutilations, if you will, for lack of a better term, that you describe in the book, or that happen in the Freetown State Forest, those seem absolutely most likely to be cults than an alien or something. They wouldn't just pick up the cow from somewhere else and leave it in the woods or something like that.
Right, and yet not all that glitters is gold, so I don't think that we can entirely say that every cattle mutilation is the work of a cult.
Yeah, totally. It probably runs the gamut anyway.
Right.
Well, let's talk about, you already sort of talked about the James Cater case. Let's talk about the Carl Drew case, because that sounds like, was he the one that gave you the picture when I was there at the radio station?
Yeah, it's really kind of weird. I mean, he's been on me to write his life story. So if you buy the book, it has this really great cover, and the picture that's on the cover there is by this guy who lives in that area, who goes kind of like by the handle sometimes, Carl Slave. And so basically he's this person who's very much into Carl Drew, who made contact with him in jail. And I've kind of been leading this or going through this kind of relationship with this convicted murderer in jail to the point that last week or a few weeks ago he sent me read the book, liked it, and sent me a picture. Just kind of say, hey, how you doing? Nice book. Good luck to you. Which is kind of freaky, I mean, even if you're investigating ghosts or you're investigating whatever, you kind of want it on the outside.
Yeah.
You want it, to not be in your bedroom. You want it to not be in your closet when you open it to get your shirt out in the morning. So it's very much, kind of like breaking down that fourth wall of the paranormal to have him do that. Because it's easy in my book to put forth that everything I'm about to say is true, and yet he's still a convicted murderer. But Carl Drew was a man who was a pimp in the Fall River, New Bedford area, New Bedford specifically, in the late 70s and then into the early 80s. And he was in charge of a small group of prostitutes. He was kind of a drug dealer, pimp, and general kind of bad, sketchy guy on the corner, kind of running things. Well, a few of the women who were under him began disappearing. And as he got more and more into the investigation, they started to realize that a lot of the prostitutes and a lot of the drug dealers in that area were all belonged to the satanic cult. And they would sometimes meet in the apartment of one of the people that was kind of involved in all this stuff. And other times they would meet in this shack in the Freetown State Forest. And they would conduct all these rituals, and supposedly one of them had been killed during these rituals. During these rituals, one of the prostitutes had been killed as the ultimate sacrifice. And then another one was. And then one who was going to turn on them, she was killed. And so there's this kind of back and forth as they investigated, once again, peeling away the kind of story to start to realize there was something bigger going on. And Carl Drew, basically everyone turned against him. They received a lot of pressure from the police and a lot of pressure from the district attorney, who were, basically using everything under the book to get this guy convicted because he looked very much and acted very much like a Charles Manson head of a cult type.
Yeah.
He was a great fall guy and a great lean on if you were looking to convict someone of it. And so they convicted him mainly on the testimony of hookers and druggies and, these people who are just kind of lowlifes. Whereas now most people feel that he actually was not the head of the cult, but it was one of the people who testified against him, who was this 17-year-old, charismatic, bisexual woman who used kind of sex and drugs and Satan to control these group of people to the point that she was even manipulating the police and the district attorney into kind of allowing all this stuff to happen. And her name is Robin Murphy. And she is now going on for almost 4 years out of jail because she copped the plea and got less time. So he's in jail still serving out his term for the murder, and she's just recently released. And a lot of people in that area feel like, of course, every criminal says they didn't do it, and that they're innocent, and that they were caught up in the whirlwind, and everyone's out to get them. And but there are a lot of people in law enforcement in that area, a lot of people who even were involved in the case in terms of, like, they believed it at the time, who now think that Carl Drew didn't do it. And he's in a jail cell. And he's kind of serving his time, and he's trying to talk to anyone who will listen. And Robin Murphy's out there, and she's basically free to roam. So,
since you're not shy about pointing the finger at her, have you heard anything from her, or have you gotten any response from associates of her or her camp?
I haven't heard. I'm expecting that shoe to eventually drop. And I guess the best thing I can say about it is if trouble starts to happen, it means that someone's reading my book and buying it, so that's good. But I really think it's a very it's a trick of the media to be able to do this, because I never say in the book, and I never say even in this interview we've just talked, if you go back and listen to it, that Robin Murphy did it. Instead, I say authorities believe that Robin Murphy did it.
Yeah.
Because all I'm doing is reporting what other people have told me. So if she wants to come forward and tell her side of the story, I would love to hear it. I would love to document it. I would love to write Dark Woods 2, The Next Generation, and explore a lot of these other sides of the case. But as far as I know, she hasn't kind of prepared anything for me, and no one's contacted me on her behalf.
Okay, yeah. I was just wondering, since you heard from him, I didn't know if you were hearing from her at all, or I'd be kind of tweaked if I did. So,
I kind of feel like, I don't think that the right hand often knows what the left hand is doing, and I'm very specific about using those hands when I say that. I think that in terms of the Carl Drew, Robin Murphy cult being part of the larger picture, I think she had no idea that she was herself being manipulated.
Now, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think that to say that, well, it's a really haunted area and there's a lot of crime going on and it's very weird and these cults all find there and they're completely unrelated to each other is a bit naive. I mean, I believe that a lot of these cults that are working there, these slightly organized cults, are being manipulated by the larger cults. So if you take a drug-using prostitute who is the head of a cult and not think that she can be influenced by an outside force without her really fully understanding how she's being used, then you're not really looking at the case very closely. So I think the potential is there for, especially considering we've already discussed, that cult might be into prostitution and drug running.
Yeah, so it's almost like a situation where maybe the upper level of the cult might be like, we need you to do this. And,
right.
And it happens, and she doesn't know why really, but she just does it at the behest of whoever her higher-ups are.
Right, and it's one of those situations where even cult members don't know who other cult members are. There's a rotating membership, and these are not abstract people. These are not people who wear robes. Some of the cult members, you can talk to. You can go into their businesses in Rhode Island and talk to them. They're not going to tell you about the cult, but these people are people that Alan Iles has investigated and arrested and taken out of the forest. People who, are not shy about their involvement with the occult, at least. And they're just walking the streets, but of course you can't convict them on something. You can't convict someone on dust, on the air, there's no proof that links them other than, the stories and stuff that can't be used in court. Yeah,
it's a spooky world. It's spooky. What about the other big case you sort of talk about here, and that's one that's gone unsolved so far, and that's the highway killer case.
There's actually been several serial killers in Massachusetts, and some people even think that that the highway killer might be responsible for some of the later cases. Some of these random serial killings might actually be the work of one person. I fully think that the highway killer is actually the highway killers. I'm one of the few people that put forward that it is all the work of a cult. And it was all very specifically done during a certain time to bring about what the cult wanted. We've already kind of talked about 1988 as being this very crucial year for some reason for satanic activity in Massachusetts and then all throughout the country. That's when these killings were happening. So we're talking at least 17 bodies found of prostitutes or drug users, female drug users, all throughout Bristol County and in a little bit into, I believe, Plymouth County and then into Rhode Island even. And that's just the body count of people that they know. Mm-hmm. Because Freetown is a great place to drop a body and have it never be found. So most law enforcement that work in the area believe that there are bodies that will just never be found that are in the forest. Wow. At least 17 bodies and 2 district attorneys actually as well have all died at the hands of the serial killer in Massachusetts who, if not for the body count, really is kind of a boring serial killer. There's not that kind of attraction to it. He's a straightforward, strangle kind of serial killer. But these bodies started turning up all throughout the early parts and later parts of 1988. And they had kind of some prime suspects, and the case was handled really poorly by the district attorney at the time, who kind of zeroed in on one person because he had a personal grudge against him. And allowed kind of a lot of the other evidence, especially what Alan Iles was saying, kind of allowed that to fall by the wayside and kind of pushed him off the case because he was so focused on these 1 or 2 people for personal things. Then one of them committed suicide, and that was it. Okay, he was the suspect, did it out of guilt, case closed. Well, case closed for them in a way, but not for the people of Bristol County, not for the people that lived in this area who still think of him as this weird boogeyman who just roams the streets. So whenever there's a killing, people's eyes turn towards this unsolved case of the highway killer and say, that's him. That's him. He's risen again, and he's coming after us again. A classic example of it is Bish, when the lifeguard who died a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that was more towards kind of the Worcester County area. But there were people in Bristol County who were saying that's the work of the highway killer. So it's very much alive in the kind of subconscious of Massachusetts, especially that part of Massachusetts, when these bodies start to kind of appear that, it's the highway killer rearing his ugly head again. But the actual person who might be responsible, once again, it's really difficult to convict and to kind of bring it out because all the evidence is kind of discovered or kind of come about in a very sketchy way. I don't want to make people think that Alan Alves is, the white knight walking, riding in on the horse and saving the day. He's as good as he is because he's somewhat sketchy himself. He can get into the mind of a criminal because he was a criminal when he was younger. And so also people tell him a lot of stuff off the record in ways that can never be used in court, and then he tries to find a way to make it usable.
Yeah.
So the new district attorney, who just recently came into power about a year ago, who ran on the platform of, I will solve the highway killer. It was actually his thing. This guy said he would do it. How long are we going to have to go before it's being solved? Elect me and I will solve it. He's actually kind of maybe evaluating some of the stuff that Alan had and saying, okay, you feel you know who it is, now let's work backwards.
Yeah.
And if you follow this man throughout kind of the years after the highway killing kind of
era,
kind of like the era, the flap. I was trying to use a word that you would like. If you follow his movements throughout different states, you see very similar activity happening in those states at that time.
Yeah. So Alan Alves thinks he has a beat on who it probably is.
Yeah. Yep. And he has law enforcement in other states that have contacted him saying, hey, we hear you're this weird, you're this expert in occults. Here's our crimes, Here are our suspects. He's like, oh, really? That guy's a suspect, huh? Huh, all right. Well, he used to live in Massachusetts. And so, I mean, it's one of those things where it's really difficult whether it ever will, but that's his kind of Moby Dick. That's his kind of journey is to, now that he's retired, to devote time to catching the killer who got away. Yeah.
Interesting. And do you think that they ever will get to the bottom of it, or do you think it's the sort of situation where, I don't know who this mystery suspect is, so maybe they'll pass away in 5 or 10 years, and then it'll all come out in the wash then or something?
I think that this crime, especially crime that's attached to a cult, is such a delicate house of cards when you're trying to explain it and when you're trying to discover it, that there are so many things that can go wrong. For example, if you're James Cater and you killed under the guise of being part of a cult, why haven't you said anything in 20 years about it?
Yeah.
Why hasn't the leader of the cult put a bullet through your brain so you don't say anything? I think that there's someone in jail in the next 5 years who will mysteriously die, or will die from a suicide, or will be, will get killed somehow, and it will be passed off, and it will be the highway killer, and there'll be someone inside doing the work of the cult to kind of get him out of the way. And so, therefore, the case will never be solved.
Interesting. Would Alan come out and say who it was if the guy dies?
I'm not sure. You would have to ask him that.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was something.
I wouldn't do it.
Because they kind of did that. The guy who wrote this is off the beaten path here, but the guy who wrote the Zodiac book, when his prime suspect for the Zodiac killing died, that's when he wrote the book and said who he thought it was. So I didn't know if that was that sort of thing.
Right. I think that.
I'm sure I'm sure there's legal hurdles to that kind of thing anyway.
Yeah, I think that the rejuvenated kind of interest in the case, first by the new district attorney and second by the huge media blitz that is Dark Woods, maybe will bring some of these questions back up, and some people will come forward with evidence that might link it, and therefore we can kind of put a fast track on finding this guy, or at least convicting this guy, because we know who it is. Hopefully we won't have to wait until the guy dies. But I feel that Alan, will probably say it if the guy were to pass away, yes.
And I don't
not to speak for him, but yes, he would. Most likely.
Yeah, I was asking you to venture a guess anyway. And not to, I don't want you to say anything like who it is or anything, but has Alan told you, the specifics of his suspect, or is it something where he just tells you that he has someone in mind that he thinks is it?
No, I know specifics, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want you to say anything because I
No. Yeah, I mean, like I don't even know. I know a bit about it. I know the whole background of it and pretty much the name. So.
All right. Well, we'll leave it at that, and people can do their own research.
But don't buy the book thinking that I say who it is.
Yeah, don't buy the book thinking that. 'Cause it's not in the book. It's we're trying to avoid being victims 19 and 20 here, so hopefully, so we'll just leave it at that. And then this cult thing, like we kind of talked about the higher level and that sort of thing, and there's a long history in paranormal circles about that sort of thing where, kind of like what you said, what Alan thinks, where like it's an Illuminati sort of thing, but I guess my question is, as far as the cults in the Freetown State Forest and all that stuff, were these guys and gals, were they mostly, unsavory characters, drug runners, pimps, prostitutes, or were there, upstanding citizens standing alongside them in the rituals and all that stuff?
Yeah, I'd say it's much more that the cult itself consists of enough people who are respectable that it would make you lose sleep.
Really?
So there really is no distinction between unsavory character and policeman in elected official. And so, it's one of those things where, some of the people who you would count on being the most trustworthy pillars of the community are the ones that are, more sketchy than the drug dealer you see on the street. The drug dealer you see on the street is pretty straightforward. You know where he's coming from.
Yeah.
No, it's the one that you vote for. that has the secret life. Who only reason why he's there in the first place is because he's part of this cult. That's the person who you have to watch out for, and that's the frightening one.
Now, what do you mean he's only there in the first place because he's part of the cult? Because he has the connections to get elected, or because he's harnessed some kind of dark power to get elected?
And I kind of think this is where Alan and I split. I think that dark power can be used, and he feels it can't. But it's much more just because of the influence of the cult in the community itself.
Yeah.
But I also feel there's an aspect of gaining some kind of power through ritual and tapping somehow into something darker.
Yeah. So this thing's got quite a lot of tentacles in this area. It's not just, it's on first glance, like you said, when you see the cult, you're not really seeing the cult. On first glance, you think it's just, lowlifes and weirdos and stuff like that and hippies. But really, it sounds like this thing runs the gamut of characters.
Well, I mean, you have to keep in mind that we're talking about the Freetown State Forest in a certain period of time. But if you really kind of look at the history of Massachusetts, at the same time that this stuff was going on, you had, the classic cases of sexual abuse in Malden and some of the areas closer to Boston that were having this kind of satanic twist to it. We were coming off satanic activity in the kind of the New Hampshire, Massachusetts line, and the Lawrence and Andover area. We're coming off of areas where, what do we have if you go kind of 10 miles north and west of that? You have the hills and where they lived. You know what I'm saying? And all the activity that was happening in Exeter, New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And the very open satanic cult that was active there in the late 70s and early 80s. So I think that, this is kind of a picture of, or a snapshot of a lot of activity that was happening. And so I think that kind of, if you watch this stuff from afar, you see that the people who are being accused are often, really, really low or really hidden in the documents are people who are highly respected and members of kind of the police and members of the government and members of, and this is not just the flashy killings. This is, document upon document of people accusing, and sometimes cases that ended with district attorneys, disappearing or attorney generals being thrown off cases and ended up having to go into private practice because they couldn't get a job someplace. So there is definitely kind of this weird, unexplained, conspiracy theory kind of twist everything. Yeah,
and it kind of explains why this sort of thing still remains in the background, still remains in the dark, and that these stories, the Drew case, the Cater case, they're not getting rehashed, if you will, or you know what I mean? It's kind of like they've been shuffled off to the shadows now because they don't want to have anyone else to really digging into it again.
It's and not only, are you going to touch upon someone who might be someone very important right now, but it also reflects just really badly on the communities. The fact that there's a serial killer who can outwit the district attorney's office and kill that many people, that's a big black eye for the law enforcement. But ultimately, you have to really think that, okay, sure, drug money and prostitution and the money gained from all that and the power gained from all that, that's excellent. But they could be doing this in a lot of different ways, but they choose this Satanism to kind of bathe themselves in doing this. Well, the ultimate goal of Satanism is fear and disorder and chaos and paranoia and all these things that not being able to put your finger and hunt the cult down does to the community. That stuff is happening, and that stuff is the energy that these people use, and their ultimate goal is kind of playing itself out in southeastern Massachusetts and in the forest.
Yeah, it's scary stuff. It's really scary stuff because it goes beyond what we call paranormal in a way. I'm sure I'd be freaked out if I saw a UFO or a Bigfoot or something like that, but it's not scary in the way cult and murders and that's human. There's a human element to that that's more frightening, I think, than UFOs and Bigfoot.
Right. It's kind of like, it's once again that thing that you unless you're hardcore into something that you can't explain, and you don't expect to hear a knock at the door and you open it up and there's a Bigfoot.
Yeah.
And he's yelling at you to stop talking about him. But that's a real possibility, with this kind of stuff. And yet Alan did this stuff for years, and I think only had really one threat from someone who was cult related at him. You know what I'm saying? So it's not entirely I don't feel the danger. I don't feel the danger talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say.
I like to think I'm so low on their radar that, sometimes I guess you hope that you're not doing the cult's bidding by talking about this stuff and putting it back out there.
Yeah, that's true, because you could also be doing what they want you to do in the sense that you're, re-educating a whole new generation of people to that fear.
Right. But like you said, it's very weird to kind of, you're going in one direction with this stuff. I remember walking into Alan Al's office, and he's now a professional hypnotist. So we went from cop to hypnotist. So, there's definitely something weird with that too. And I went into his office and we talked, and the first day he pulls out, these 3 huge boxes of old cases. And in these cases was some of the weirdest kind of things that we talked about, everything from, sexual abuse to someone self-mutilation and dumping the blood all over a nativity scene to decapitating a grave. And you're like, okay, dude, I wanted to talk to you about ghosts, and I thought that you were connected with that somehow, and now you're handing this stuff off to me?
Yeah.
When that kind of falls in your lap, it's easy to make the leap and start thinking that perhaps ghosts and zombies and puckwudgies and serial killers are somehow all related.
Yeah, and you bring and that's a good segue to my next point here in the notes, and that's just this weird connection here between crime and paranormal activity and that energy that's going on there in Freetown and the Freetown State Forest. What do you make of that? How do you wrap your mind around that? It's a chicken and an egg situation. Are they drawn there from the energy, or does the energy draw them there? Does that rise in paranormal activity give rise to crime, or is the crime an effect of the paranormal activity? I mean, these are these are rhetorical questions I'm sort of just throwing at you.
Right, and it's one of those things that ultimately you have to just sit back, observe it, and say it comes from the same emotional or same energy core.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to chase your own tail like a cat, you have to kind of admit that will never be solved. I'll never be able to. One of the classic questions I'm always asked when I talk about this is, well, where did it start?
Yeah.
What was the first thing? What is the reason for all this? And which is another thing that makes Freetown so interesting, is that it does touch upon there was tragedy there. So if you're a tragedy buff, you can latch onto that and investigate, and you kind of have a reason. If you're an energy person there, I mean, you definitely have, geology that kind of taps into it, granite and water sources and potentially ley lines. And, you can kind of attach yourself to that and attach your cart to that horse and go away with it. So it's really one of those things where I've stopped kind of exploring the why, and I kind of am just kind of holding everything up to the light. And I'm hoping that in holding it up to the light, we might not be able to come to any answers, but we can start to kind of see this connection and understand it and maybe apply it to other places.
Yeah.
And you can start to see, I mean, I feel like just in doing this kind of stuff, I can go just over the border to a town that used to be a Freetown, part of Freetown, and you can start to say reevaluate Lizzie Borden and the case there and say, okay, well, maybe Lizzie did do it, and she was under the same kind of negative influence because that house itself has had several tragedies attached to it. So it allows you to kind of investigate the paranormal or investigate, some aspect of cryptozoology with a different and hopefully stronger perspective on a relationship scale.
The other big picture thing I kind of want to talk to you about outside of Dark Woods is just your experience here in the Massachusetts paranormal scene, because you've been in the field for quite a while now, so you've seen the ups and downs and the explosion, really, of paranormal, of the paranormal scene. Especially, I feel like it may be more in Massachusetts than in other parts of the country. It's big all over the place. Don't get me wrong; it's huge in most states, but I feel like with the Gothic background and the Salem thing and a lot of the history here in Massachusetts, because we're part of like the oldest part of the country, you probably have a little more history and thus maybe more of an interest in the paranormal scene. But I've always been sort of interested in the national scope of the whole thing. I haven't really taken a look at the regional picture of it, but I know that you've been a part of the Massachusetts paranormal scene for well over a decade. I guess just talk about your experience in the scene with the people and stuff like that, and how you've seen the evolution of the field over the time that you've been a part of it.
Well, I think I'm in a unique position because I've been alternating local book with national book. So I've been able to kind of not only cultivate some very strong relationships with people in the Massachusetts paranormal community, but also to kind of look at Massachusetts' place in the country.
Yeah.
And you start to see paranormal themes develop in different parts of the country. Mm-hmm. And everyone kind of attach, maybe link their history with why there are ghosts. So, for example, it's very, very popular in the South to associate ghostly activity with demonic activity. If you have a ghost, it's a demon. And in the Midwest, it's very much attached to, I should say, the Pacific Northwest. Going the Southwest, it's very much attached to Native Americans. Pacific Northwest, very attached to settlers and the gold rush and things like that. And in Massachusetts, we have such these cycles of history that have happened here that you can't really put a finger on overall what the connection is between the Massachusetts history and its ghosts.
Yeah.
In other words, we have these very, this classic Native American aspect to our paranormal community. Every place was built on an ancient Indian burial ground in Massachusetts. But then you also have, this very Puritan thing that kind of sweeps through and goes into Rhode Island as well. So you have the witch hunts, and you have this kind of settler aspect to things. And then you have, this kind of modernization and this Civil War and Revolutionary War and all these things that kind of sweep through Massachusetts and affect it. And it's very much this kind of hodgepodge of all the great stuff. So it's really this kind of microcosm for all the activity in the country kind of happens here in Massachusetts first, or you can at least find it here. So it's a great place to be an investigator. And if there are any doubts whether there might be something to this whole Bridgewater Triangle idea, or this whole Freetown State Forest as this kind of, thing drawing in negative energy, find Freetown on a map, and you won't be able to find it. So find Fall River, New Bedford, or any of the places that are in southeastern Massachusetts, even Brockton, and draw a 100-mile just circle around it. And you will find probably, and I don't put myself in this circle at all, but you will find the highest concentration of high-profile paranormal investigators. Everyone from John Zaffis and the Warrens in Connecticut to Jeff Belanger in Bellingham, Massachusetts, to some of the great Tom DiAgostino. Some of the classic people have kind of swept through this area or been a part of this area. They all come from within 100 miles of Freetown. And I think that people from Massachusetts always feel everything is better in Massachusetts, but I feel maybe the paranormal is one thing where they might actually be right.
And baseball.
And baseball is right. But, it's even kind of – it's funny, like even investigating north and south. You know, the groups that are up north are very different from the groups that are down south. You know, and you've been exposed to some of the southeastern Mass, you know, the spooky South Coast guys, and some of the, you know, of course, you know, TAPS is you know, probably 10 miles from Freetown is their home base. Mm-hmm. Be like 15, 20 miles actually.
Yeah.
There's this kind of culture and personality to the south side, or the southern area of Massachusetts, which is entirely different just from the north. So I'm in a good position where I'm kind of a liaison between those two kind of sides of the paranormal coin, and not having a group, but rather being an investigator and a writer has allowed me to cultivate relationships with both people and to see that stuff.
And what would you say the flavor of the north side is? Because I'm only really familiar with the southern guys.
Right. I think that the north is much more kind of connected to the Salem kind of haunting stuff.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Where it's much less about energy and much more about so much has happened on this one spot that it has to be haunted. Whereas the south is much more about something is working, and that's why so much stuff has happened on this spot.
Yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying, yeah. And
to like Methuen. I work in Lawrence. Methuen's the next town over. Great history of hauntings there. I mean, great. Like, you could walk down the street and you could, you know, basically create your own kind of ghost tour going from all the places that are kind of notoriously haunted there. You know, very different from southeastern Mass, where it's, see that forest? That forest has something dark and unexplained in it. Or see this bridge, these very public places that aren't connected and don't have necessarily industry attached to it. That's kind of the other big thing I would feel probably about the two different areas. Kind of a commercialism in the north as opposed to this very evil stuff happening in the south.
Yeah, definitely. I totally see the commercialism part, because Salem's like, oh man, they make their part and parcel on that whole witch trial thing.
I mean, when someone asks me, have you investigated Salem? I say, no, not really. Well, why not? I'm like, okay, well, first of all, it didn't happen in Salem. And second of all, it's been done. I mean, what more can I say? That is such, as a reporter, you would understand, that's such tainted ground that anything that comes out of there, you know, you have to put so much salt into that, so we're hearing something, that it's kind of not worth my time. But give me a personal thing that happened. Give me a personal story from someone who just happens to live in Salem, and that's very engaging.
Yeah, the witch trial thing, that's like Roswell. You know, it's been done to death.
Right. Although if you think about it, witch trials, right? Mm-hmm. And then that happened actually in Danvers and not Salem. And there you have the most haunted building in Massachusetts, you know, with Danvers State Hospital right there.
Yeah.
And the constant tragedy that's befalling that area. So
there's definitely something going on. Now, what about the explosion here of paranormal groups? Because like you said, you started out with the website and everything. I will bet money that when you started out, there was probably a much smaller number of paranormal groups. I'm sure there were a few. But nowadays, there seems to be a group for every town, if not, you know, and these are small towns. Like, my town's small, as you know, and there's apparently a paranormal group here.
Yeah, I need to tap into them. I need to know where they are. I want to talk to those guys.
I found them by accident, and I'm trying to find them again now. So when I do find them again, I'll let you know. It's weird. Like, one day I just found them and was like, this is bizarre. What are they doing? But I was like, I don't want to contact these people.
Right. I think that it is funny. My website was really kind of much less about investigating and much more about telling stories, and it was actually originally going to be used as a resource for fiction writers too. And that's kind of was the concept of a meeting place. And I said, you know, so supply and demand. There are so many national, or there were a few national websites. And then, of course, there's some New England websites like, hey, no one's just focusing on one area. That's what this stuff needs, is people to focus on just one area. Mm-hmm. So I'll do Massachusetts because that's where I live and that's where I love and that's where I've investigated. And so there really were, I think there were at least 3 or 4 ones that were about Massachusetts. Now, of course, Jeff Belanger already had his site up at that point. But he's just located in Massachusetts. He has a national and not international focus.
Yeah.
And Obi-Wan's site was up. And once again, she's in Massachusetts, but not a Massachusetts focus. So there was only 1 or 2 or 2 or 3 Massachusetts things, and now it's really exploded. So it's really, I get so many emails from people who want to join my group, or who want me to kind of act as a mentor to their group. And it's kind of, you know, on one hand, it's very like, oh, would you really know this? But on the other hand, they're doing a lot of very interesting things that I don't think would be explored if we didn't have kind of this saturation. And eventually the cream will rise to the top, and the people who are the best at it and who really have something to do and something to say intelligently will remain, and the people who are just on it because it's a fad will fall away. So we'll be left with kind of the best of both worlds.
Yeah, so you don't find it as daunting that there's so many groups and that kind of thing?
Yeah, like, see, I don't really care.
Yeah.
Because what I do is I connect with people. And so I don't feel the need to necessarily be like, well, I'm investigating every single weekend, and so I need to compete with anybody.
Yeah.
Go out and spend your time in your cemetery. I want to spend my time tonight interviewing this person who had this very profound experience happen to them, where they saw a ghost or whether they touched the other side. Not that I don't like going out to that cemetery and investigating, but it's kind of like the other thing is more, because it has a soul to it, is much more attractive to me.
Yeah, exactly. And it's good that you're not really a part of any group, because then you don't get caught up in the politics of the groups, because it seems to be that's one of the other problems, I guess you could say, with the group explosion. It's just the interpersonal politics that go on is worthy of a book in and of itself that would have nothing to do with ghosts or anything. It would just be,
Well, actually, one of the ones I'm working on now is about kind of the phenomenon of ghost hunting itself. And kind of that aspect to it. It's a how-to guide for paranormal investigators, but it also gets a lot into the sociological aspects of people who investigate and kind of the ideas put forward by these groups, and kind of the group mentality and the kind of, it's just the typical roles of a group playing itself out. If you're going to think about entering a group, never join a group where there's a husband and a wife. For example, because you're always going to have that aspect playing itself out. And there's these kind of rules to being in a group, which sometimes are ridiculous and sometimes not.
What do you mean? I got to ask now. What do you mean by don't join a group if it's run by a husband and wife? Just because you'll always be like the number 3 guy, or you're going to be forced to, or you're just going to be caught up in their own little drama?
Well, right. It's much more of like a drama type of thing. You don't want to. Do you really want to be in the middle of a fight between the two of them? And they're talking about whether it's a residual haunting or whether it's an intelligent haunting, and what they're really saying is you didn't do the dishes last night.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just impossible to, whatever weight they bring from their marriage, they're now bringing into that investigation. And for me personally, I'm like, that has nothing to do with ghosts. It's completely amazing in and of itself, the whole ghost group phenomenon. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's just something that makes me very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because you feel like you have to walk on eggshells. You feel that it's just, it's just an argument playing itself out on a paranormal field, and it really has nothing to do with investigating.
Yeah. Well, one of the exciting things about Dark Woods is that you kind of make the transition here from someone who had an online presence and was an investigator and did a lot of writing and was featured in a lot of good publications and stuff, to having your own book and stuff like that. So I guess just talk about the experience of writing your first book and sort of going from, just an investigator to an author now. Right.
And I would actually probably say it's the, a reverse of that, because I always considered, and still do consider myself an author first. I am not an investigator who writes, which I think is where there are where there's mistakes sometimes. I am not a person who investigates ghosts, has some ideas, so I decided to write them down. I am an author. I'm a trained author. I went to school for it. It was my life's passion since I was a little kid. I love to write. Mm-hmm. And this is where kind of life has chosen. I never would have assumed that I'd be writing ghosts about books. I thought I would be writing the classic American novel. But my two passions converged, much like a crossroad, if you will. And this is kind of where it's been. So it was very unusual for me to be considered an investigator for a while. And that took some adjusting, because people would say to me, so Christopher Balzano, researcher or investigator, I'd be like, no, I'm a writer. And a lot of times it became I had to apologize for that. I'm sorry. I'm a writer. I'm not he's just a writer. He's not a real investigator. which I always found funny because I probably spent more time on genuine cases, really knee-deep in things, than a lot of people who are just kind of going out to cemeteries and documenting activity.
Yeah.
So it's very exciting for me a lot of people feel like the book would be the supplement of finding the evidence. I don't think we're going to find evidence that's going to prove there is life after death. Or I don't think there's some kind of Rosetta Stone that is going to make it all make sense. I think ultimately what we're going to be left with is a chronicle of the people during this time. And I want to be the person who's involved in helping to chronicle that. So for me, the book is kind of the end game, and people reading it and enjoying it and being intellectually challenged by it and entertained by it is my goal. So, ultimately I would like to do more books and sell more copies and be able to dedicate myself entirely to this. But seeing it, I saw my book on a bookshelf at a Barnes and Noble. I don't know if I could say a chain like that, but in a bookstore. I saw it on a bookstore on the shelf. In the computer of that bookstore for the first time this Monday. And it was amazing, and it was wow. And when I held the book in my hand for the first time, I still have I don't allow anyone to touch my review copy that I got, which is really just the first copy of the book. There's nothing special about it. But it was my book. So in terms of making the transition, this is what I feel like I've been trained for my whole life. This is what I've been kind of leading towards. So holding that book is kind of like the culmination of what I've been hoping for quite a long time, much longer than I was hoping to find that crucial piece of evidence that was going to, make the whole ghost scene explode.
Yeah.
That was a very long-winded answer.
No, but it was a great answer. It was a great answer. It was good. It was good. I was listening to it and thinking these are going to be in the intro here, some of these parts. And sort of to wrap it all up here, to put a big bow on it, you kind of already touched on the ghost book you have coming up soon, the instructional book. But what's next for you? I know you have a ton of stuff in the pipeline, so let's hear what you have coming up for books and for speaking engagements or anything like that you want to talk about.
I kind of feel a little bit like I'm the Morgan Freeman of the paranormal this year. I think you said it in an interesting way that there's an up and coming aspect to me. And then it's going to hit hard. It's really kind of, maybe it was a prophecy. Maybe you've got a little bit of a sixth sense. You know it. But I've got 3 books that are going to be due this year. So come Halloween, I'll have 4 books out there for people to enjoy. I have another book by Schiffer, which is coming out around Halloween, which is called Ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle, which is an examination of just the paranormal, I should say the ghostly side of the paranormal in the same part of Massachusetts that we're talking about. And in the same respect, I've got 2 national books with major publishers that are coming out. The first one is called Ghostly Adventures, which is due out in July, I believe Amazon is saying, and that's first-hand ghost accounts from across the United States. And so it's kind of like all these different ghost stories and kind of my commentary on them. And then around that same time, which is really insane to me because I just have 1 chapter finished, but it's probably going to be out for all the other ones because of the publisher. It's so huge, is called Picture Yourself Ghost Hunting, which is a how-to guide along with the DVD that I'm actually producing as well. So you can not only hear about how you investigate and why some of the theories are behind it and all that stuff, but then you can pop in the DVD and you kind of go through the investigations with some local Massachusetts groups and see how you would conduct a good haunting, good investigation in a cemetery or in a haunted building or in a famous location. So it's kind of like this 2-part attack to learning how to be the best ghost hunter out there.
Nice. Well, we need a book like that because there's a lot of not so best ghost hunters out there. So it's
interesting. I thought it would be kind of like this a common sense stuff because there are so many groups out there. And yet, and I'm always kind of like hesitant to be like, oh, this is what I'm working on. But every time I mention it, whether it's to a group or whether it's to, they're excited that there's going to be something like that out there. You hate to use the expression, but it really is kind of being sold as a, ghost hunting for dummies kind of book, which there isn't, oddly enough.
Yeah. And there's so many groups. And a general, there's some interaction, and, there's some good interaction with the Taps family type stuff. but it's still quite a splintered field, so this is the kind of thing we could use. So I'm looking forward to that for sure. Well, Chris, like I said, you've been instrumental in helping me get a look into the world of Massachusetts paranormal scene. I consider you probably my closest local friend here in the field, so I've been psyched to have you on the program. And you sort of touched on something that I said back in October, but it's starting to come to fruition now. I'm going to tell you folks, Chris Balzano is definitely going to be one of 2008's breakout stars in the world of esoterica. You've heard him here on the program. He's done a lot of other radio appearances. You're going to be hearing him other big programs, I'm sure. I'm really looking forward to seeing where his road takes him, because it's been just fun meeting him and knowing him for the last year, and seeing all this stuff on the horizon is just exciting to see. Like I said, folks, breakout star in esoterica in 2008, Chris Balzano. I'm telling you, put it in the bank. I'm telling you, it's a fact. The book we've been talking about tonight is Dark Woods, Cults, Crime, and Paranormal in the Freetown State Forest. It's from Schiffer Books. You can get it pretty much, if you can't find it at Barnes & Noble, tell them to order it, and you can get it there. Or go to Amazon.com and order it from them, or go to Schiffer Books' website, order it from them. It's an awesome book. We just scratched the surface here. There's so much in there that I just want to hit on some of the zanier stuff, some of the even odder stuff that he hits on in the book. But there's tons of other stuff that I didn't even get a chance to talk to him about. So it's definitely worth picking up and reading. Like I said, Chris, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. It's something we've been talking about since April. I've been waiting to get my copy of Dark Woods so we could have you on the show. From a personal perspective, I can't thank you enough for your friendship and for your time and for your patience with dealing with me, over the weeks and months and all of the adventures that we've been on, and surely all the adventures we're going to be on in the future. So I look forward to all that great stuff. Of course, folks, you can find all kinds of information on Chris at his website, www.masscrossroads.com, MassCrossroads.com. Definitely check it out. Tons of great information on all these awesome stories we've been talking about, even more, and information on where you can get the new books and stuff like that. So masscrossroads.com, check it out. And thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks, I really appreciate it, Tim. I really enjoyed talking with you. And anytime you want to go and see if we can get into another adventure and I can lose another car, please feel free to call me up. So
that does it for this week's edition of BOA Audio Season 3. Big, super huge thanks to Chris Balzano for coming on the show. Telling you folks, breakout star 2008, Chris Balzano, keep an eye on this guy. You can find out more information on Chris at the website, www.masscrossroads.com. Check it out. Little in-house notes time, of course. We already talked about the podcast feed problems. Check that out at the beginning of the show if you missed it somehow. We're getting a new podcast feed, in-house podcast feed, very reliable. We'll make sure it does not go down again. So stay tuned for more information on that. Nothing else really going on, percolating on the big projects, BOA DC and BOA After Hours. Hopefully we'll have more information on those items next week as we kick off March. And now, call your friends, wake your neighbors. It's time for BOA Audio listener feedback. Let's dive right in here with a very interesting letter from someone billed only as Tobias/Der. I'm not sure if that's two names or I've never seen the slash between the names, but it's Tobias/Der. And here's what Tobias has to say. I was rather unhappy with the Sci-Fi Channel putting a guy on a bed and letting us hear that he was abducted by aliens, but later when they were done, he was placed nicely in his bed with his, quote, underwear on backwards, unquote. BS. This is bad stuff, people. What is worse, bad aliens or bad actors? This is not UFO hunting. People, they are out there for real. Wake up. Tobias/Der. There you go. That's a haunting email, my friends. I haven't really even checked out either of the UFO Hunters shows. As soon as I heard they were kind of going in the direction of ghost hunters, I was very disappointed with the whole idea, and I was like, fuck that. I'm really not a big ghost hunters fan, so when you apply that concept to UFOs, I don't care. I'm not interested. You've seen one of those shows, you've seen them all. Apparently the Sci-Fi Channel UFO Hunters was a one-and-done thing, so I don't even know what's going on with that. But I have been reading some of the stuff on UFO Hunters on History Channel. Looks pretty good, and I did check out like 5 minutes of it. Thank you so much for writing in, Tobias. Thank you for your interesting perspective on the UFO Hunters story. If you want to be a part of BOA Audio listener feedback, here's how you do it. Either write to boaaudio@hotmail.com or go to binnallofamerica.com and click contact. Either one of those methods takes your correspondence beyond the velvet rope and into BOA Audio listener feedback. Now, of course, you know the time of the program. It is the thanks portion of the show. Soon you're going to be hearing from these people. Soon you're going to be hearing from the fantastic BOA staff on BOA Audio After Hours. But for now, let me just give them a thanks here at the end of the program. They are, of course, Leslie, Chiron, Arlie, Jovi, Tina Senna, and Rochelle Hawks, the outstanding, top-notch, world-class BOA staff. If you're only listening to BOA Audio and you're not reading the columns at binnallofamerica.com, you're only getting half the story. Stop by BOA and find out why so many are making Binnall of America part of their everyday search for esoteric news and opinion. Speaking of which, of course, Binnall of America, we are growing week in, week out. We are growing month after month. So many people discovering the website, downloading stuff, and of course, so many new episodes of the program. This sort of thing costs money, believe it or not. It's just not, we don't have a magical tree of esoterica here where we can just pluck things. It costs money for the phone calls, it costs money for the hosting of the show, it costs money for a plethora of little things that you'd be surprised by. But in general, it costs money. And we don't charge, we don't have ads on the show, we don't do anything really to generate money except for the store. And of course, our calls here at the end of the program for donations. If you can help support the audio series and the website, please make a donation at binnallofamerica.com. Click the PayPal button. No donation is too small, and all donations go towards keeping BOA and BOA Audio up and running and freely available for all of our great listeners the world over. Next week on the program, we're going to hold off just a bit here and not announce anyone just yet. The facts of the matter are simple, my friends. I have a couple of interviews already in the can, but they're kind of along the lines of stuff we've already done here in February, and I wanted to get someone in with a little bit of a different perspective on things. I want to do something a little bit different from what we already presented here in February before we sort of revisit some of the themes of February later on in March. So I got on the horn with a big player in one of the major fields in esoterica, and he was down for a BOA Audio return. So he is penciled in here for next week to tape. And once I tape the interview, we'll post the preview on the website so folks can find out who it's going to be. It's within the realm of ufology. I'll even tease that out a little more. In the event that the interview doesn't go off as planned, we already have something in the can, so we'll definitely have an episode next week, no matter what. Rain or shine, sleet or snow, there will be an episode. And on that mysterious and confusing note, we're going to bid you adieu here this week. Thank you so much for listening, folks. It's been a little bit rocky here in the middle of February. I apologize for that. Stay tuned. More great episodes coming up around the bend. More great, exciting stuff coming up from BOA. Until you hear from me next week, thanks again for listening, folks. This is Tim Binnall, signing off.